Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much, Philip, for the opportunity to present here. Philip is one of the gifts to academia, an eclectic academic with fantastic ideas, and today is an example of that. I'm both Otago and Melbourne University, and you'll see the colour scheme change in my slides. Okay, so that's why I held fractional appointments at both places. Now, to get things going, this is your constitution, signed by Queen Victoria in 1900. And it's got a little thing in it that gives me the mandate to be here. It defines your Commonwealth and your states, and it actually lists New Zealand as one of the states of Australia. Now, both Philip and I have been through the corrections or updates to this. It has never been removed. I have a mandate to be here. What's more, there's an interesting other aside here, is that you have a particular politician in this country. Now, I was born, Tony, I'm slightly older than you. I was born on 9 April 1967, as was this politician. We may be twins. The same politician, in a rather stick it to the Australians situation, New Zealand, was leading the voting for New Zealander of the Year about 3 months ago. Who was that politician? Barnaby Joyce. Why isn't he using this in his defence against dual citizenship? I'll let you judge whether I might be the long-lost twin of Barnaby Joyce. Now, what I want to do today is I want to pick up on something that Michael Waldridge said. He said, basically, I took his fantastic lecture as saying, on the one hand, you have sacred cows, cathedrals, and public hospitals with social values, and we put 95% of our effort into those things in the healthcare system, sometimes not entirely rationally. He also said, why did Denmark fall from the highest life expectancy to the lowest life expectancy? The drivers of that may not be the same as this. This is going to be driven by things like smoking, tobacco, alcohol, physical activity. I'm going to arrive at that in about 5 or 10 minutes' time. I'm not saying health services don't matter. Certainly since 1970, they've been responsible for half of the reduction in cardiovascular disease. Philip did the title for this talk. He said, I'm going to be talking about the Vanguard state. So I looked up last night what Vanguard is. Actually, Vanguardism is this: a strategy where the most class-conscious and politically advantaged sections of the proletariat or working class described as a revolutionary vanguard form organisations in order to draw larger sections of the working class towards revolutionary policies and serve as manifestations of proletariat political power against the class. That's what I'm doing. So I'm here waving this flag, which at least looks a lot more different from the Australian flag than the current New Zealand flag. But I'll be a little bit more modest today, and we'll just merely share some developments. I'm not going to try and tell you guys how to run your health system. Well, maybe not quite entirely. Now, why am I here? I'm here because of something I call the 100 manila folder problem. This photo is of a lot of manila folders, but it's also of the Director General of the Ministry of Health. Now, I had a meeting with him in 2006, and during that meeting, we were talking about what can epidemiologists do to try and help, and he had this problem. He summarised as the 100 manila folder problem. Each year, budget time, decision-making time, 100 manila folders on the table, and other for the drugs at that time, and now devices, as Bronwyn explained, there was no way to compare the health gains between these and the costs. So that's what I have dedicated a large part of my last 10 years, is to trying to quantify and get comparability in a cost-effectiveness framework, but from an epidemiological perspective, leveraging off burden of disease studies. So decision-making in health is often idiosyncratic, often lacks an ability to compare health gains, as I've just said. Drugs and devices well solved, but the approach, in my view, could be deepened and broadened, and that's what I've taken on as my objective in the last 10 years. So Philip also asked us to think about a sentence in the Whitlam speech that most resonated, and I think people have put this up already before, except I would just add economic and epidemiological research to that quote. So what I'm going to actually talk to today is going to throw some issues out there. There's no way I can talk about everything, and I have no intention of doing that, but I'm going to talk about the linked health and social data in New Zealand, called the Stats New Zealand Integrated Data Infrastructure, sometimes called the IDI. Then I'm going to talk about some uses of cost data that we have made and that might be transportable to Australia. I'm trying to create these bridges at the moment between New Zealand and Australian research so you can see where I'm coming from. I'm then going to talk about something we're developing called interactive league tables. Always frightening to present to a bunch of economists about league tables. I'll try and justify them a little bit more when we get there. And if I have time, I'll talk about morbidity in the face of increasing longevity. But this is basically summarising the Stats New Zealand IDI. So what's happened in the last few years is we've moved to Scandinavia. We have one big sandpit of data where the health data is in there, the justice data is in there, the educational data is in there, the tax data is in there, and it's all linked together. Now that provides two key advantages to people like me. One is actually a real-time, well, every 3 months, place to just go and do your health research. So even without linking to other ones, you can go into this big place. We've got a data lab 2 floors down from me in our University of Otago, and do your research in there, and it's constantly updated. And I'll show you some slides where we're just pulling out all the costs from various types of diagnosis. But the other thing is you can jump in there and you can now link them up. And I'll show you an example where we use the tax records to work out, at least from a human capital perspective, productivity costs. Now, just as to give you some context, so about 3 years ago, myself and Graham Osborne, who was head of information in the Ministry of Health at that time, myself and Rod Jackson were congratulating Graham on his effort to setting this up. And he said, no. The person who got this going is Bill English. So he's now our current Prime Minister, but he came from a sort of health background with his partner being a GP, then was Associate Minister of Health. At that time, he used to, as the health economics class in our masters would go up, and we'd spend about an hour and a half from the whole class, an hour and a half each, one evening a year, and just chat to him while he was Associate Minister of Health, Minister of Finance. He was getting sick of proposals coming to Cabinet that weren't using the data there. So he's the one who banged the heads together and got this data infrastructure together. It's because of him that this has happened. Quite a legacy, I suggest. So here's just one example, paper that we published recently. Philip is a co-author on it. And what we can do here is we can just dive into the data, and because every single event, we've got 82% of all healthcare in New Zealand is public, so it's all in there. We just dive in there, a lot of data management to line up all the person time. It takes quite a lot of work, but then you can pull out the total cost for everybody by phase of their cancer journey. And then what you can do is you can work out the cost of people without cancer, and you get the excess cost. So no need to decide that your CT was due to this cancer, but that procedure over there was due to cardiovascular disease. You're just using excess costing paradigm. Not surprisingly, you see the costs go up slightly in the month before diagnosis, then they go up in the month of diagnosis for your test, they go down, and then they go up again if you're going to be dying of that particular disease. That then becomes useful when you start doing this sort of thing. So the first column is for the costs in the first month post-diagnosis, cost per year, cost per month, and then in the next period, the last 6 months of your first year. Why is that important? Because we can use that to pull into our models with a very quick costing engine to get the cost offsets for our economic evaluation. So this is a costing engine on steroids for doing that cost offset part of your economic evaluation. I'm hoping to be able to crossbreed some of this between Australia and New Zealand. Here's the example whereby you actually dive into the IDI now, and you've got your health data, and then you link every individual up to their tax record, obviously highly anonymous. And what you see here is for propensity score matched people who then go on to develop a stroke at that midpoint. They're matched up to that point, you can see their income tracking together. Then after the stroke, you see the deviation in those two lines. So the grey line is those people who didn't develop a stroke, the black line is those who did develop a stroke. Bingo. The area between those two lines is your human capital approach to productivity. We can argue till the cows come home about friction and human capital, but what we're going to try and do here is not place too much value on the exact value, but actually start ranking various diseases, and particularly looking around the retirement age as we're trying to lift retirement age for superannuation. We want to see those interventions that will have more productivity cost impacts around that period of time so that we can have a socially sustainable society as longevity increases. The program of research that I lead in New Zealand is something called BODE. It stands for Burden of Disease, Epidemiology, Equity and Cost Effectiveness, obviously enough, but everybody just calls it BODE. So we're doing a lot of preventative simulation there. Those are the top yellow boxes there, dietary, interventions by CVD risk, and a whole lot of stuff on productivity and morbidity around the retirement age. I'm not going to go through all the platform there, but just to give you a sense, there's a lot of data underneath this thing, and a lot of it's coming from that linked data sets and then put into multi-state life tables. And this is essentially what we do. It took us about 4 years to get to this point, but here we go, one slide. We're modelling prevention. And we're largely, but not exclusively, we do things like colorectal cancer, we do things like HPV vaccination, we do things like cancer care coordinators, picking up on your talk. But most of it is through risk factors. And it's just like the bath. You have the incidence, the water coming in. The plug is the case fatality rate going out. You may have some recurrence or remission going on. And then the height of the water is the prevalence, which then drives the total morbidity in the population, as well as a lot, but not all of, but a lot of the costs. And most of our models are playing with the tap to reduce the incidence by reducing tobacco or something like that. So here's just one example. So this is for tobacco tax increases. This is a highly stylistic graph. What this graph is actually showing you the tobacco smoking prevalence in New Zealand projected over time. So on the y-axis we have that tobacco prevalence, and then the future on the x-axis. The blue line is business as usual, projected based on changes from 2006 to 2013 census and a whole lot of other things. The red one is where we layer on top of that a 10% per annum increase in the tobacco tax. This is not pie in the sky. It has actually been happening as on the books to keep going to at least 2020. The purple line, my favourite one, is if I had been Minister of Health and Minister of Finance and we just got rid of tobacco, went to zero. And then what we can do is we can quantify the health gains, call it QALYs, call it averted dailies, I don't care. But in this part here, the distance, the gap between the blue and the red lines is about 275,000 QALYs. That's about 1.3 million, which is not bad. You're actually getting about 18% of all the theoretical health gain from doing stuff on tobacco through this one intervention around tobacco tax. It will not get us to our smoke-free goal. We've got a goal to be less than 5% by 2025. It's not going to get us there, but it's not too bad in returning the gains that are out there. Now, the bummer about this is when you start being honest. This is a graph of time, and I've just shown you the cost one given it's an economics forum, but the one for QALYs looks much the same, a little bit pushed to the right. It takes 5 decades for the maximum cost savings to happen. So the cost savings are due to averted or prevented tobacco-related diseases, which is telling you we're playing the oil tanker game with public health. I can convince you of massive health gains that we get that you won't get by fiddling around with somebody's something over here, Herceptin. Still quite good though, but they're a long way out into the future, and I'll come back to that in a sec. And because it's an economics audience, you'll notice the yellow line dips beneath. That's because you make people live longer, so at some point in the future they cost more because they're still kicking around. That's what that is. Now, the second to last thing I want to talk about, if I've got time, is something we call the BODE Interactive League Table. So we took the methodology for many of our evaluations from your ACE studies, the Assessing Cost Effectiveness, ACE Prevention, ACE Obesity, ACE Mental Health. You know the stable of interventions. Now, we've done about 69, I think we're getting up towards 100 evaluations now. And what we've designed is this thing, an interactive league table where the user can go on, they can select whatever intervention they want, and then they can look at the QALYs, the cost, the ISA, and more that's coming up I'll talk about at the end. And what this allows us to do, and Paul, this is coming to your point about how do I work out how big my intervention is? Well, what we're trying to get across to the public and policymakers here is that there's massive variations in health gain between interventions. So the top one there is salt substitution. That's getting rid of sodium and replacing it with magnesium and potassium and bread, cereals and things like that. Those are big health gains. And you go down to something like a voluntary effort with the industry. They're just salt interventions. I'll show you some tables in a sec which have other interventions. Many of the things we do are cost saving, admittedly a long way into the future, so you see a reverse plot here with the cost savings, admittedly a long way into the future. And then you can start putting on interventions that are both from salt, which is the purple histograms here, and then you've got the second one as a sinking lid on tobacco supply. That's where if we actually legislated to take tobacco down to zero by 2025 by control at the border, which New Zealand could do because we've got 1,000 kilometres of water in every direction and we have good border security. It is a possibility. It's not being currently used. That's okay. We'll do it other ways. And then you see things like H. pylori screening, the red one coming in there, high rates of stomach cancer amongst our Indigenous populations. Now, ones that aren't up there that have come up today, colorectal cancer screening actually comes out pretty damn good. About 100,000 QALYs for the population alive in 2011 simulated over the remainder of their life. It's a good one. Herceptin, it's on there. It's cost effective for some, not for others. And you can start weighing it up. So this is what we're trying to do, is create that information for more rational and informed debate at the policy table. So on the league tables, they're available there if you want it, or just basically the quickest way to find it if you were interested in this, just search on that public health expert below. In the absence of the conversation till recent in New Zealand, we created our own blog, and we've got a whole lot of blogs up there about how to use the league table. It's part of our program. We want to include all the boat evaluations. Now, what we're doing at the moment is we have funding from AIHW to try and get the Australian evaluations in there too. So we've randomly selected 12 to start with, and we're trying to squeeze them in there, which requires basically doing inflation adjustment of the cost, depending on the base year, and purchasing power parity, as well as on the epidemiological side. You've now got to divide everything by the population to get per capita to compare countries of different size. So far, it's working quite well for the ACE ones, but most of the other preventive ones we've sampled, they've got different time horizons, different discount rates. But we're giving it a crack, and I'm very keen to try and create an Australasian engine here. Future extensions, we want to start showing the variation by ethnicity, and we're going to start presenting it by timeline because of that problem of the health gain from any prevention being way out into the future. And include product. It's not a decision-making tool, it's a conversation starter. You can see blogs there. Now, just briefly, I want to finish up by talking about morbidity. So Bronwyn showed a version of this graph from 1950. This is a version from the book that myself and Alistair Woodward wrote about mortality decline in New Zealand and the tremendous increase in longevity in New Zealand, but heaps of other countries. And the question I just want to address here is, should we be looking more at morbidity these days? So what are we doing about that? Well, I'm just going to show you one graph in the interest of time. This is hot off the press. It's not been peer-reviewed. I'm playing with it at the moment. But what we've done here is we've done 3 interventions. The green one is that tobacco tax I showed you before. The red ones are get rid of the tobacco, but still allowing for the time lags for the tobacco effects on cancers to wash out, yada, yada, yada. And then the purple one is the red one is the no tobacco, and the purple one is no overweight obesity. Again, allowing for time lags for it to wash out. The key points here are as follows. There are substantial gains in HALIs, health-adjusted life years, or QALYs, or averted DALYs, that's the solid lines, as well as life years even in the next 10 years. So they're there. It's a log scale on the y-axis. They increase over time. But the key point here is because it's on a log scale, if you look at the gap between those lines, you see a much bigger gap between the purple dashed line in the purple solid line, because you're getting a shitload more, to use a colloquialism, a lot more HALIs gained than just life years. You're gaining HALIs from people who would have had those life years anyway, so you're giving them better quality of life, and you're gaining some more new life over here, and there's a lot more. It makes sense. If you're going to reduce obesity, you're going to lower diabetes, arthritis, those conditions with high morbidity. This graph is just for 60 to 69-year-olds deliberately, because we're trying to think now about the interventions we can do that will contribute to a healthier population around the retirement age to sustainably allow lifting the retirement age. I'll stop at that point. Kia ora koutou.